Okay, hello. Everybody here? Please come on in, have a seat. As you may notice already, we have a whole bunch of swag up here for you that if you didn't get any yet, you can get some at the end of the class. A little bit of housekeeping for the course. The second quiz, we've already successfully made it through the first quiz. The second quiz will go live next Monday. So please make sure that you're all read up and everything. It'll be the same format, the same kind of quiz, same kind of questions. We won't use that format that we used on question 7 that got us into so much trouble. But that'll go live on Monday, and then it will end on Thursday. And again, it will be a timed thing, so once you start it, you got to get it done in an hour. And you should be able to get it done in 10 minutes. If it takes more than that, we should talk, okay? All right. Any other questions? Any other logistical questions? Oh, yes. I think you should be through chapter 3. I'm not looking at the syllabus right now, but I believe you should be through chapter 3, although I think the quiz is only going to really cover chapter 2. But, you know, so, well, that was a big fluff of an answer, but I think you are supposed to be through with 3 so that we get through the book. We're doing really the first half of the book, Tim Brown's book, Change by Design, and it's a perfect accompaniment for what we're doing in the course. Okay, any other questions? Other questions? By the way, Malika, is Malika here? Yeah, let's make sure to touch base right after class, okay? All right. Okay, well, for those of you who are not snowboarders, I guess you're the ones who didn't come rushing up to get the stickers and everything on the table. Our guest today is Chris Doyle, an incredible innovator. He actually goes by Doyle, and so we'll call him Doyle for the rest of the day. But he has transformed the snowboard world for decades. He will be sharing some of those experiences and techniques for innovation and iteration with us today. A little bit of background. Doyle dropped out of Syracuse University after initially intending to become a photojournalist, but he quickly found his way to Vermont and the ski resort areas there. After a couple of years working on skis and other equipment, he returned to school and earned a BS in finance. He briefly tried banking, but returned to his passion in the world of skiing and snowboarding, where he came upon his first Burton snowboard. As he says, "I wasn't aware of my burgeoning reputation until the day in the summer of 1992 when one of the owners of Ski Tuner Manufacturing came to me and asked me if I wanted to get on their rebranding of STM to Grind Right." Now, if you're like me, you don't know either of those companies, so we're going to learn more about it later. Marketing specifically to snowboarders, snowboard shops, and snowboard manufacturers. I jumped at the chance. I was employee number 4. I had no idea at the time how this would change my life. Well, Grind Right took off and became a very successful company, and after 5 years it was sold, and by then Doyle had become a star in the young industry. He was courted by and moved on to Burton, and in that company he has since filed 17 patents for improvements and innovations on snowboards and other equipment. His use of computer-aided design and manufacturing software has allowed him to use rapid prototyping to iterate design ideas fast and faster to shorten the time to market for Burton products. So please join me in welcoming Doyle.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody, and I would say thanks for coming, but I guess this is kind of required, right? I haven't really ever had anybody introduce me like that, and so I thank you all very much, and frankly, I can't be at all blasé about this. This is really quite an honor and a privilege for me to be standing here and speaking to all of you about what we do here at Burton. And so, all right, we'll get on with it. I like to call my program Backstage at Burton because when I was at Syracuse University, I earned a lot of extra money to go through school by doing rock and roll shows. And this stage right here actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the Landmark Theater where we did shows like Joe Jackson back in the day, if anybody remembers him. The Backstage Tour is kind of a way for you to see what we do and how we develop our products. And when people think of Burton Snowboards, they really just think of the snowboard, but we're a very broad line company, and we make everything from snowboards to boots to packs to helmets to goggles to outerwear to casual wear and apparel. And I'd really love to see more Burton packs on everybody at Northeastern University, so go to work on that. Every year, Jake and Donna shut the company down in the springtime, and we have a day on snow together where we get the company photo taken. And so this is at Stowe, and this is everybody in the company. And I like to think that everybody there is a part of our R&D program. Everybody there is passionate about snowboarding, and everybody has ideas, so it's really quite a crew to work with. Kind of go through how we operate. We work on a seek, build, scale model, roughly. This sort of morphs as time goes on. But if you take a look at the slide, the product seekers are the ones that are empathizing with the customers and our riders. And from what they sort of have their ear to the ground or nose to the wind or whatever, determining where they think the market is going to go, that goes into my world, which is build. And I sort of overlap with the seek, and I'm in the build zone, but I also help the handoffs into commercialization. And so these are the primary core teams that we use for that. There's a lot of extra details up there, but keep that in mind as we're going along. Because of the fact that I do most of my work in the build world, I work in prototyping. And all of our prototyping is done right in Burlington, Vermont on our campus, and it's done at the Craig Kelly Prototype Facility, which was named for Craig Kelly, is dedicated in his memory. Craig was the first real, true superstar of snowboarding, and he is the guy that really worked hard to teach Jake that don't worry about just making a quick buck. Focus on the riders, focus on the team riders, and the success of the company will come from that. And we have been working on that model ever since. We unfortunately lost Craig in an avalanche in 2004. He was a very great friend of mine. And I'm really honored that I get to work in a facility that's dedicated to him. And he used to call me up from anywhere in the world at any hour of the night with some crazy idea. And this is before email and anything else. He would fax me designs that he had scratched up on a piece of paper that he'd want us to build, and he would have us like ship them to some drop box in like, I don't know, actually Afghanistan, you know, because there's big mountains there. So Craig was huge in pushing our products and developing. At Craig's, our job is to make novel prototypes. And here you can kind of get a look of what the daily sort of lineup would be for the guys and girls that are building boards. So here you see a whole bunch of different snowboard cores and components that we build based on engineers' designs that are looking forward to going out to team riders as a general rule for testing. So here you see cores, nose protectors, ABS sidewalls. All the cores have to be shaped and profiled. And if you take a look at those cores very closely, you'll note that there are so many different pieces of wood of different types and different orientations in those cores. And we've learned over the years that, you know, to make the snowboard, which is really nothing more than a very highly refined spring, to work well for the riders, you know, if we made the tips and the tails as light as possible, then the rider has less inertia to have to spin the board or stop it. We learned to turn the grain on the edges 90 degrees and stand it on end so you have good column support, yet flexibility. So if a rider takes a hard deck hit, the board won't shear. All sorts of things like that we've learned, small details over the years, go into the design of the boards. From the engineer's CAD model, which for the most part is a spreadsheet-derived 2D model of the board, we create all of our own individual cassettes, which we actually call cookie sheets, because we kind of cook up nice cookies. But here you'll see Mike, basically on his mill, he'll take the engineering design, and this is a cassette that he's making for a board that we were building for Stefan Maurer, one of our team riders, a couple of years ago. Every cassette is totally unique. When it comes to graphics, we have a fully set up zone for both silk screening, but we're doing an awful lot more with digitally printed sublimated graphics. This past summer, we reissued a couple of our most famous pro models, and this one that you see right here is for the Sprocking Cat, who is Terje Hawkinson, who's been a pro rider for Burton Snowboards since he was 12 years old back in like 1991, and he's still with us to this day and still killing it. We reissued his board this past summer, and so we took that graphic and that design of that time, but we recreated it, freshened it, we digitally printed it and sublimated it, and then we took his old board shape and we used all new and modern material. So when we made this board in 1992, it had some very basic fiberglass in it, a very basic wood core, but you take a look here and you see a full sheet of carbon fiber, you see 2 layers of very thin triaxial glass, and then if you look very closely, you'll see very, very wispy gossamer looking glass that we took right from the sailing industry, which makes his boards incredibly light yet strong and have so much pop. He helped us with this design, and from that, we go and we build it up. I wanted to show this slide here because Kelly Clark is one of the winningest snowboarders ever, male or female. And here we have a board with all the different pieces and parts that are going to be made up for Kelly for this season. And when I see that, I see the potential energy and the potential fun that is just in this pile of inert parts that once all put together and everything and that a rider gets to climb onto becomes this amazing fun tool and toy. And for Kelly, it's a heck of a way for her to make a living. So I just kind of put that out there. You know, I work in this building and I walk by these every day and I'll see that and I'll just be like, wow, I wonder where that board's gonna go and what it's gonna do. So that's kind of one of the things, a little look in that. All boards are handmade. Everywhere in the world that we build snowboards are handmade, and these are 2 of our most experienced builders. The guy that's actually spreading the epoxy is JG. He's been building and designing boards at Burton since 1983. He is one of our original team riders, and he was an original dealer back when being a dealer meant you were selling snowboards out of the back of your station wagon up on I-93 in New Hampshire. So, you know, we've come a long way since then, but those are our roots. And the guy standing next to him is Johnny Thunder. He is one of the most, he's built more different snowboards than I think anybody in the world because every board that comes to him is a little bit different, and he has to hand fabricate them to adapt them to exactly what the engineer has in mind and what the rider's needs are, and he is amazingly skilled at that. And this is what the board looks like when it comes out of the press. And the board on the right with the Craig Kelly signature, that was the Craig Kelly reissue Pro model. And then the Terry Hawkinson is the one right next to it. And you can see all the flashing and everything around the edges. One of the things that we're really involved in at Burton these days is sustainability. It's been a program for us for years now, but every year we take better steps in that. When we go to work on the board after it comes out of the mold, you see Thunder in the background trimming and shaping the excess off around the edges. We are working with a new epoxy called recyclamine, where we can take those waste parts and we can soak them in this, basically it's a heavy-duty vinegar. So my workshop today smells like a pickle. And all the components will come apart to their individuals, and then we can send them down their individual recycle streams instead of just throwing them away. So these are things that we're looking at doing to continue to make the sport more sustainable. And Grant here in the foreground, who this guy builds and restores Porsches in his spare time. He goes through all the quality control checks, which are incredibly detailed in building a board. You take a look at that piece of paper he has in front of him, and there's about 30 different measurements that he has to take on every single snowboard that comes out. And that table right there that you see is perfectly flat, and the little device that you see right in front of him is how we flex the boards and measure flex. And there's a bunch of different tools. So every board has a very, very in-depth and rigorous quality control to it. And Emily is one of our best board finishers ever. Emily makes the boards beautiful and ride good. And that stack of boards behind her, she just goes through them, but she does every one with just a tremendous care. And this was a really fun thing for me to see was after 20 years was a new stack of Craig Kelly Pro models. And then this is me, and I'm holding on to one of my very first snowboards, which at that time was a 91 Craig Kelly Pro model. You know, and then on the table in front of me is the 2016 reissue Craig Kelly Pro model, which you know, it's hard for me to explain kind of what a moment that was for me to hold my old friend's board in my hand and that we were building the new one for him. So these are some of the neat things that we get to do in the prototype world. Binding design. Binding design back in the day was pretty simple. This is Jake's first binding. It was a water ski hoop, okay? But even for those that are the engineers in the crew, you can sort of see that all the holes were specifically located. There's little center cross sections in them, and so some engineering went into that little piece of rubber. Well, these days, it's a little bit more complex. And this is a SolidWorks model of a high back that I worked on 2 years ago. And you can see just all the details and everything that you have to actually work into it. And a lot of that is because we have a very, very talented industrial design team, and those people are ruthless taskmasters, okay? When I was making that high back, they'd be sitting over my shoulder, I'm doing the CAD model and everything, and they would point to this fine detail over in the corner, and they'd be like, I don't know, I just don't think I like that, the way you've got that. And I'm like, well, what do you want? And they're like, well, I just want it to be a little bit more like, just a little bit more like that, And I'm like, what do you mean like that? He's like, I don't know, when you hold up the light, I just want it to kind of go like that. And so you have to figure that out. And so yes, every now and then you want to just like take them out back and go all 8th grade on them, but we all get along really well, and I've learned a lot working with them. This is just sort of a little GIF that I made, hopefully it works, of, that kind of goes past that. It was basically a little thing of how SolidWorks works to make a base plate, and how basically you start with a solid block and you kind of have to whittle it out to kind of get down to the actually heavy ID thing that you actually want to do. I'm going to give that one more try and see if we can make that go, because it was kind of fun. Starts with a blank screen. I guess not. All right, so here we go with this guy in the lead here in the flannel shirt. He's our lead engineer. He's an MIT engineering grad. And he's been working with us now for about 14 years. The guy sitting next to him with all the little designs in front of him is our industrial designer. He's the guy, okay? And it's a good thing that we're good friends. And so working closely with him, the other guy next to him, he's Mark, and he's the on-snow tester, and he runs our scene of testers that is global. And we have testers all over the world that work without pay, just so they can test Burton product. And then the guy with the PBR hat on, he's the business manager. And it's his job to make sure that the product comes through on time, on cost, on budget, and everything works. So this is a really pretty good description of the product team right there. And their roles kind of overlap a little bit, but we all have to kind of work together. And then when it comes down to engineering, I can't not talk about my guy, Ray. This is Ray Kowarski, and he is my engineering savant, and he lives out in his lair in Montana. And this is how I talk to him most days, is over Skype. And he sits out there, and he is a CAD savant. And he just likes to make new snowboard products just for fun, and that's how we found him. And he came to worked with us in Burlington for 6 years, then just decided, I want to go back to Montana, and we said, fine, we have Skype. And so he's now our contract engineer. And every now and then, we talk him into coming back to Burlington, and he shows up with a whole box of his mom's oatmeal raisin cookies, which is always a great thing to get started with any kind of a development meeting. And then we go to work on CAD. The earlier CAD model that I showed you was SolidWorks. Since that time, we've stepped up to Siemens NX, which is just an amazing surfacing modeling program. And this just sort of shows you kind of how mind-melting this stuff can be. This is a model that I was working on when we were working on this product right here, which got launched yesterday. Okay, yesterday in Burlington, a product that has consumed the last 3.5 years of my professional life, which is our step-on boot and binding system, launched to the global sales team. And this model right here is all made in rapid prototyping and painted. And since then, it's gone to production. But this was one of the CAD models of a very early prototype of that when we were experimenting with it. And it is just some really mind-melting stuff to try to keep track of all those surfaces and get the things done that you want to do. And then here we go, like when Ray shows up, because he does a lot of this work, we'll have all the prototypes made for him. And then we just start getting around tables and we start testing and we start feeling it. We start seeing what's going to work and what's not, with, of course, Ray's mom's cookies right there in the middle for sustenance. I want to go over a little bit of a project that we worked on a couple of years ago that sort of gives a we work on so many different things, and this gives a little illustration of how we do things. This was called our double take buckle. Ray always wanted to take our buckle, which traditionally had used closure and retention on the same surface, which caused us to have to compromise a little bit on each. And Ray always wanted to make the top surface a helical gear because it's smoother, and I always wanted to put retention on the backside of the ratchet tongue because I figured that was just free territory that we could go to work on. This slide shows our old buckle, where to put the ratchet tongue in, you had to shove it almost 80 millimeters before you would get the first click. And then we would watch riders at the top of the mountain, especially newer ones, and they'd have such difficulty getting into their bindings, and we called it ghost ratcheting. And we could just see the frustration that it caused. So the idea was, why don't we make retention and closure come together? So in this slide right here, you can see the retention is on the underside, and then the closure is on the top side. The two are very close together. So now the rider only had to put it in 30 millimeters to get that first click of engagement, and it made it so much easier. We actually kind of called it Insta-Click technology. And this was just kind of a neat idea of how two people's desires to make it better kind of came together and turned into an actual product. And at the same time, here's a quick look at the SLS prototypes that we made early on. And you can see how it's very rudimentary, but we're actually able to do some computer modeling and then grow them in our selective laser machine and actually get physical parts that we can put in our hand to test and learn from. And at the same time, we thought that this was a good opportunity to change the way we design our straps. Traditionally, most of our straps are made with an internal plastic spine covered with some kind of a textile for a design that looks good for the rider. In this case, we thought, what if we had the superstructure of the spine, which actually held you in, and then the understructure, which touched your foot, was like a hammock or an arch, okay, that didn't have any textile. So we just, in this case right here, Ray did some CAD work, and we printed in SLS the lower part, and then I hacked up a couple of different straps on the top part, and we just started to put those together prototyping style, and just to see how they felt. So that was the very first one that he and I made together. And then Ray started to get to work on CAD. And I do love how CAD, I don't know, that reminds me, does anybody remember Light Bright? Probably not. Really? Anyone? Yeah. I loved Light Bright. Anyway, this reminded me of Light Bright. And with all those little brightly colored points, Ray was able to really hone in the shape of that spine to get it to look the way the ID crew wanted it, but also have the strength and tension that we needed to hold you in. And then he went to work on the what we call the hammock pad. And this, to me, is where CAD design crosses over into just amazing art when we take all the different surfaces that we use to make all the holes and the shapes, and we just extend them out. And I was pretty stoked when we did that. It kind of looked really pretty cool. We put them together in CAD, and then we started prototyping the actual physical parts of the way we wanted to see them. And so this is a good rendering of the two parts together. And this is actually a prototype of a 2018 strap for a future development of this that I printed in our Lulzbot 3D printer just 2 days ago. So this is the Cura software model of that strap. And these are how we prototype. And we're using this material that we recently discovered called NinjaFlex. And it's made by a company called Fenner Drives. And the stuff is amazing that we can actually print with this filament a strap like this that we can take out on snow and ride. And that's our whole point of prototyping, is to see if we can get from concept to ride as quickly as possible. And that's the finished product right there. Okay, double take buckle, hammock strap. It changed the way our straps and our buckles work. And when that binding hit the shelf and we looked so much different than all of our competitors, all of our customers and riders just gravitated to that because they were like, whoa, what is that? So that's the kind of thing, trying to get it so that it's compelling and get people to put their hands on them. This is what you're going to do with all of your books that you're spending a lot of money for right now. They're really useful later on to hold your computer monitor up. Just thought I'd throw that slide in just for fun. How are we doing so far? All right, cool. Now I'm going to introduce you to my workshop. Okay, in my workshop, I have 4 different types of 3D printers. And the glowing beast in the front, the big white machine, that's my favorite. That's the big one. That one is our selective laser sintering machine. We've had that one since 2004. And a little quick history on 3D printing and rapid prototyping. We've been using 3D printing at Burton since about 1993 when we started using stereolithography. We didn't own the machine ourselves, but General Electric just down the road from us had a machine. And it was pretty cool even then to get a model that would come up out of a resin bath that we could actually put our hands on. These parts were incredibly fragile, and if you dropped one, it broke like glass. So they were marginally useful in that we could look at what we were looking at. Engineers could put the micrometers on them and see how they measured out. It would help them with their designs, but we could do zero functional testing. We invested in the SLS machine because we wanted to be able to get parts that we could be more rigorous about actually testing. And the first model that we ever made out of it was when we were developing our EST binding. And everybody's free to come up and take a look at these later on. But we made a very crude hoop shape of a binding. And when we got it out of the machine, we were kind of like, wow, that's kind of strong. And so we just took it out and wrote it. And you can see how we went from this to this with some ID in it to the actual physical model right here. And all these are rideable. Okay, and that's what's been an amazing thing for us. When we went to our first user group and told these scientists and engineers from NASA and the Defense Department and all these hardcore engineers that we were going straight from the machine to riding, their heads blew up. They were like, "You can't do that. The data sheet says this, and you notched IZOD." And blah. And we were like, "Well, we did." And so we actually went to work with Boeing a little bit to help them develop and qualify a new material because we had so much experience working in cold temperatures. The machine in the background that you see right there is a Connex 500 made by Objet, owned by Stratasys now, and that is the true 3D printer in the room. It actually has print heads and it prints liquid plastic that's cured in real time by a UV light. We print a lot of boot outsoles, goggles, badges for soft goods, backpack parts, all kinds of different things. And on this, one of the models that I have right here actually has a 3D printed outsole from that machine, which allows us to make outsoles of the proper sizes that we need and then glue them onto the boots and actually make sure everything fits before we go to tooling. This is what the inside of an SLS build can typically look like. In there's probably over 100 parts, and on the step-on binding project that I alluded to here a little while ago, our big project this past 8 months has been to scale the tow hook components and get them to fit properly for the men's large, the men's small, the women's large, the women's small, and the kids' bindings. And so we had to make sure that all of these different sizes worked and functioned properly. So we had to center them in that machine, and we were able to physically test each one of those. So this build right here, I put that together. That was probably about a 60-hour build. And then you can see scattered in various places around the build, we have tensile bars, standard dog bone shaped tensile bars. And we will run those through our testing lab post-build where we'll pull on them, and we expect them to break at a certain elongation, a certain load. And that helps us to prove the build out. So that way when the engineers come back to me and they say, "Hey, this part broke, so your build stinks." And I say, "Well, the tensile bar did this and my melt flow index was that, so your part stinks." And then we get to brawl. It's really kind of fun. One of my favorites is when I'm making a build, okay, when I run my collision detection and nothing collides, okay? The machine will very happily grow parts together all day long, so you have to be very careful about that, yet you really have to get the parts down to as low a Z height as possible in order to minimize usage of material and minimize the amount of time it takes to actually get the build done. So these are all things that we have to do to make that happen. That's a 2018 build that you saw right there. When the parts come out, it's like playing in the sandbox. And you have to go in. The actual powder around the parts acts as the support material, keeps everything oriented properly in X, Y, and Z. And then you sift all these parts out, and you get the individual parts in your hand. This right here was a very specific high performance part for our winter sales meeting that we just had yesterday, and that is a shot ski glass holder. So these are other things that we get to build as we're going along. This is what it looks like after you've broken all the powder off of them in the sifting machine. Then everything goes to a bead blaster, and we bead blast the parts, and when they come all out, here you see a bunch of, this is what a typical build looks like. We have a backpack, or actually a rolling bag half frame. We have some tow hooks that we're working on. We have 2019 components for the new progression rental step-on binding that we're trying to create right now. And up in the corner, we have some parts for a backpack, an AK backpack prototype. This is what the machine does for us throughout our whole line of the company, is allows us to try things in real time. So this is Emma. Emma is a third-year Northeastern biomechanics student, and she had about 3 weeks off at the end of school. She lives in Burlington, and so she came in and just job shadowed me. And I taught her how to use the Connex, and so that became her machine. So here's a goggle prototype, and she gets to break out the build. This is, again, the machine that's builds, it's an acrylate material that's cured in real time with UV light. She breaks the parts out. And then this is kind of the gritty part of 3D printing. Everybody thinks that it's just this kind of like really cool world, but you've got to like break all the support material off and clean the parts up and everything. And even though the support material is just this kind of waxy stuff, it's kind of gnarly. And so that's why we wear gloves. And then everything gets to go into the little blaster right behind her for final cleanup. So Emma was a really great help with me for that. And this is a little glimpse into future world right here, where we're experimenting with new ways that we can build kids' snowboard boots. So they can be multifunctional as just run-around boots for kids, yet when they want to go snowboarding, boom, they can go right into the snowboard bindings. So we can try many new things with the Connex on that. That was about a 28-hour build that you see right there. Okay, and we actually did this in dual durometers, so the actual boot component has a softer tongue with a slightly harder durometer main shell, and that's another thing that the machine allows us to do. Helmets. Helmets is a huge part of our business right now. At some point, we expect that some resorts around the country are going to start requiring helmet usage. So we have grown this program. Dave Connery is our helmet design engineer, and let's see if this one works. This is the FDM machine where the helmets are grown and actually printed in an ABS filament, and this is what the helmet looks like when it comes out. And the white support material, we break that off, and then we drop the helmet into this tank that has this total Breaking Bad solution in it that you don't want to get on your skin because it'll eat right through you. And it soaks all of the support material away. And we actually have used that in a lot of different ways. We printed all of those head forms up there in the FDM. We did our own CAD for the head forms, and then we printed them up so that we can test fit all of our helmets and goggles on them. And then they turned out to be really great ways to show our new product line to our dealers or reps as we're trying to show these off. And then the Lulzbot 350 that we just got. This is kind of a MakerBot style machine. What I really like about this machine is the material. This is a boot midsole that we made in the softer durometer NinjaFlex, and we can actually glue that onto a boot and then take it out and ride it. The stuff is incredibly durable, and it's really, really pretty cool that we've come to that capability where we can actually prototype boots in-house and take them out and ride them on snow. And let's not forget soft goods. Like I said earlier, we're a really broad range company, and soft goods design and prototyping requires, in my eyes, is almost as much engineering as hard goods design. And here you can see the wall of all these different patterns for garments, which all have to be made in very specific ways. And right now we're actually experimenting with a new CAD model where we're going to be able to actually start making our patterns in 3Ds. But we'd make those patterns, we stitch up prototypes right there in-house, and here I am testing a new hood on a coat with a helmet and goggles just to see how the hood fits over and everything, and to help the pattern makers actually get the sizing and everything of that correct. So soft goods and soft goods prototyping is a huge thing for us. Once we get everything made, everything has to get tested. On the step-on project, this was the original test plan. It was like the Dead Sea Scrolls. There was so much that we had to get through on that. And it was very intense to get through that whole testing process. And these are our test guys in the walk-in cooler. Anyone? All right. Maybe I don't need to use that. Yeah. Anyway, it's kind of funny when he stares at me every time I walk by. It's 23 degrees below zero in that cooler, as Jim's hanging out in there right now. And we do a lot of testing in there. That is our heightened cycle tester, which you can see it has a hammock strap on there on the boot. And we cast the liner that's inside that boot out of a flexible urethane. And that machine, we can do 50,000 cycles in all directions over a course of a weekend and see how a product is going to wear and how it's going to hold up at 23 below zero. And sometimes, for instance, with the step-on project, we did 5,000 human cycles in there. So basically, we'll put out an email to the company and we'll say, sign up, go over to Craig's, put on the coat, get in the freezer, do 250 cycles, and then mark it down on a sheet. So you get to, hang out 23 below zero, stepping in and out of a binding 250 times. And, it's kind of funny how much that makes you want to go snowboarding. It was really kind of crazy. We have a full-on helmet impact test scenario, and here's Dave doing impact test because in helmets we have to conform to CE and ASTM standards in helmet design. So we had to invest in this. So we can make sure that our helmets actually have a good chance of passing before we send them to the actual testing laboratories. And here's Jim getting all medieval on a board. We call that the Batwing fixture, and we actually made that ourselves. And all boards get, when they're tested, the last thing that we do to them is we break them in half right in the middle, okay? And that tells us how well the board was laid up. And if the board doesn't unload with a tremendous bang that makes you want to dive under tables, we're disappointed. And but that's it's kind of crazy, but yes, the Batwing break in half test. And you can kind of see these boards, how they've been torn up, and you see the breakage right in the middle where they've experienced the Batwing, and then the squares where we chip through individual layers of top sheet and fiberglass, looking for bonding, looking for top sheet adhesion. And sometimes, like, you take a look at that multicolored board over there. When that one went into the lab to have to get destroyed, I was just like, oh, do we really have to kill that one? The board gets done getting made, and it thinks it's going to go out and ride POW someplace, and then all of a sudden it goes into the testing lab. It's like, no, I didn't want to go in here. But so we probably break maybe 5,000 boards a year, okay, that we build just to sacrifice in the test lab. And then the hard thing is explaining to the riders, our pro riders, why we just destroyed a perfectly good board just for them, okay? This glance at this board gives you a real idea of some of the crazy things that we do, like the little strips of carbon glass that we run crossways out there near our engineered grain direction, which helps the boards have really great flex and pop along your edges. So those are just like little details that we do in some of our boards to make them perform better. Sometimes the pro riders really like to kind of come in and get in on testing. This is Mikkel Bang, really appropriate name for board testing, but working on some insert pullouts because this is the kind of stress that he puts on boards. The guy can just come up and throw a tail block at any time, and the tail has to be strong enough to support his almost 180-pound, 6'3" frame that he just jumps up and stomps on that thing. So these are the things that we have to test for. These are the riders, with the kind of stress that the riders put us through. After all this, it's really important to get everything on snow. On snow is the final arbiter of testing. And so here we have Mark, our on-snow testing guy, explaining the new double take buckle and hammock strap to Kelly Clark before she goes out and tests it. And here's JG, I mentioned him earlier, going over new board designs with some of our pro riders. Every year we have a development camp, and it's out in Breckenridge, and we've rented the same house every year. And this is a good gig if you can get in on it, all right? Just going out and testing snowboards for a week and a half for work after 20 years in this company, this is still really good work if you can get it, I'm here to tell you. We go on out and we get our team riders out there and we run them through our new ideas. And it's really great. We get so much feedback from them. So here's G explaining the boards to one of our riders. Then here's a pile of the double take buckles and hammock straps before they headed out for Chile and New Zealand for South American testing. Ordinarily, there's usually 1 month of the year, September, where there's no snow anywhere in the world. But this year, it's just amazing. They've had such an unbelievable winter in Chile and New Zealand that we're still testing down there now. So it's been really cool. We'll take that when we can get it. And here, back home, is where the testers are going through their databases, making sure they know who's got what, because this is the hardest thing. When you send equipment out to snowboarders to test, these guys don't have phones. They don't have addresses, okay? You end up sending stuff to like FedEx drop boxes someplace, and then you have to chase them for feedback. And when they're in South America or New Zealand for the summer, it gets even harder. So these guys, their job is Herculean to kind of try to figure out who got what when, how many hours are on it, are we getting what we need back? And so that all happens there. And this is just kind of an example of local testing. You can see right here on the guy in front where he's riding a stock binding on his front foot and he's riding an SLS step-on prototype on his back foot. And this was one of our very early first days of testing the step-on binding. And I tell these guys, I'm like, okay, just go on out on the trails, make a few nice easy turns. I just want a little feedback. And it was a powder day, and so what do? They drop straight into the woods, okay? And they're just out there dodging trees, jumping off of stuff with SLS components. So that's what we kind of have to prototype for. There's only one speed that anybody goes, and if there's snow, they're not doing anything else. This is kind of a funny thing because once it's all done and designed, well, we got to manufacture it. And so here we go. Our lead engineer takes a look at one of the files that comes back from our factory, and there's no drafts on it. As a matter of fact, the red, it's all negative drafts. So you can't get it out of the tool. And the manufacturing engineer is just kind of like, oh my gosh, we've been through this. Okay, so these are the details of the frustrations that we have to get through over and over again in order to get the parts so that they're actually manufacturable. And these details are really crucial because tools are incredibly complex and expensive. So this is a schematic of one tool for one size of a left and a right superstructure spine for the hammock strap. That tool is $70,000. Yeah, no kidding, it's no joke, okay? And if you blow that tool, because it takes about 8 to 10 weeks to make one at $70,000, and if you blow that, there's a really good chance that you could lose the entire product launch, okay? And just flush a whole ton of money down the drain. And those are really ugly conversations to have with Jake and Donna, okay? And you just don't want to do that. So we're very, very careful about that. And here's another rendering and schematic of that same tool. This is where all the stuff that we do coming up to this point gets very real, okay? And tuning and making tools is very, very challenging. And we're run by these ruthless taskmasters of the project managers with their timelines and their Microsoft project sheets and everything, and they are constantly over your shoulder going, okay, where are we with this tool? Have they fixed that one? Have they made the adjustments on that? When am I getting T1 parts out of this? That's their job, and they're very, very good at it, but oh, geez, what a pain. Because we got to get samples in, and when we get samples in, final testing of samples, but then the samples have to go out to all of our salespeople so that they can get them out to the dealers so we can actually sell it in. All these timelines are very crucial. And then working very carefully with our manufacturers. This is our manufacturing team that's making the step-on bindings. We make all of our bindings in Asia, and they are as proud of being Burton employees and making Burton products as anybody else anywhere in the world, and they're very, very good at it. And so when they got the gig that they're making the step-on binding, they were thrilled, and they met me in my shop, and we went over some prototypes together, and they were very much looking forward to it. And then it comes down to the final tester, which is Jake. And Jake still tests everything that we make. And you just never know on one day when his admin, Ash, you can see on the little note there, a little post-it, is like, so Jake's gonna go out tomorrow and he wants these boards, this binding, those two boots, give me that coat. And you wanna see a scramble start, okay? Because everybody's got things to do and all of a sudden, oh shoot, Jake's gonna go ride tomorrow and we have to pull all this together. It gets pretty crazy, but he is still that into his products and his company that he goes out and tests everything. And he's still incredibly fit, and we're really glad that he goes and does that. And this is kind of what happened last night. It all really comes down to it, that eventually all of this stuff becomes beautiful product that goes onto the shelves. And so this is JG kind of doing some last minute flexing of some boards and everything before they actually go and get shown to all of our global sales force, which is what happened last evening in Burlington right now, where we launched the step-on binding and boot. And so this is kind of where it all finally comes down. Everything that we do turns into an actual product. And for me, when I finally see the products fully graphicked, fully done, all the colorways and everything, it really is. It's so fulfilling that all the work that we've done, that's what we turn it into, because again, we just turn it into something that someone is going to go out and have just an amazing time on. And so in a crazy world, we feel like we build a little bit of joy and happiness that people can have just by what we do. And so that's what we do. We build products for people to go out and have fun on. And that's it. That's what I got for you. And thank you again.
Fantastic. So let's go over and
Thank you.
Let me just grab that. Let me get a walk.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
It's hard to imagine a better presentation for what we're talking about, because you really took us through like the whole enterprise. I wrote down a bunch of questions beforehand, and all of which you addressed in your talk, which I don't think has ever happened before.
Wow.
But it's
Do
completely
I read
fine.
your mind
I
okay?
have one that I want to start with, just because it's kind of a 30,000-foot question, and then we can get into more of the detail. But it strikes me that Burton is a different kind of company than I thought it was. Do you see your competitors as other people who make snowboards, or like Nike and Under Armour and a kind of sportswear kind of thing? Because those seem to me like very different kinds of businesses, and they overlap. But I'm just curious how I know you're very much into the prototyping, and we'll get to that. But I'm just curious if the company is thinking about itself in a changing way, because
So very much so. Our industry has changed so completely. I've been fortunate enough that I've been in the snowboard world since the very beginning, and I've experienced that incredible newness of it when we were the new kids on the block, and where everything was really, really fun, and it was just like rock and roll, man.
Right,
we were
right,
having a great time, and then things went like this and kind of peaked,
Right.
and the entire industry is consolidated. The Nikes and the Under Armours have gotten in, and they've gotten out.
Oh, really?
Okay. The only one of those big companies that's still in snowboarding at all is Adidas, and they only make boots.
Huh.
Okay, but the big companies got in and they got out.
But you guys expanded into
And we
outerwear and
absolutely.
branded stuff?
We started making outerwear in 1986. Okay, so we've been doing that for a long time. Bags in like '89. So we've been doing it for a long time. Back to our competitors, really our only competitors now left are genuine snowboard companies like Libtech, like Capita, like Signal Snowboards. And K2 is the last ski company that's actually still a viable competitor, but they bought up Ride Snowboards, they bought up Moro and 5150 and all these different brands, and so they sell all those brands under the K2 umbrella. Right. So I have a ton of respect for our competitors, because anybody that's still in it is in it because they love it.
Right.
Mostly though, other companies, they make just snowboards, whereas we have that full line.
Well, that question leads me into one about the subject of empathy that we were talking about briefly before this presentation. And even there, it's curious. Like, one of the things that I wonder about is, it looks like, snowboarders are, I know from observation, they're really into it. They tend to be much more into it in a way than I'll go along for the ride and go skiing, but if I don't go skiing, it's not the end of the world. For them, it seems like they are a very, very dedicated bunch.
Driven, yes.
But it's about performance and technical specifications, clearly, because they're trying to do, the good ones are trying to do harder and harder tricks and
all the
things,
time.
and they're stressing the board and everything. But it's also like a fashion company in a way.
Absolutely.
And so, I wonder how you try to, I can see how you get into the skin of a snowboarder purely from performance. In other words, it's like they're quantifiable metrics about how much stress this is going to take, and why it's better than the other one, and so forth. But there's also like there's a look. I mean, it's very much about identity, and I'm very curious to know. I can tell how, you shared some examples of how you test the measurable stuff, like breaking the board, or how good the cross lamination is, and so forth. But what are some other ways you test? Because I think these folks would be very interested in that.
Well, it is fun because there's no question that the look and the feel of our products has to be stylish.
Right.
Okay, and we're very. We spend a lot of time, a tremendous amount of time, even on just like the look of our bindings, and make sure when they hold them up to the light that they have the light come off of them properly.
So that's a metric.
It's a metric, but it's also very visual. You know, it's nothing. You can't put a number on that. It's really hard. But when it comes down to the actual like outerwear and goggles and helmets and the design of your boots, all this textile cut and sew, that's fashion world.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And we have an entire team. We have office in Tokyo. We have office in New York City. We have people in these organizations that go to Fashion Week. They have their Metropolis magazine and Vogue, and we do cross. I just recently had the entire Vogue magazine staff in my R&D lab, okay, and they were just out of their minds about it. But we spend a tremendous amount of time working in that fashion world because. You're right. People want to look good when they're on the mountain. It's like, this is me and this is who I am. This is not my daily work. This is my Superman outfit. That's
right. And it's often I'm often impressed by how really thought out those looks are.
We call it getting properly kitted.
Properly kitted, yeah. I mean, for me, it's just about like trying to make sure I don't freeze to death. And
right.
Then I look at people who are, and so it makes me. I think
you can be properly kitted and still freezing, and it's okay.
It's okay.
And so we try to be very technical about it. It's like be properly kitted but comfortable.
Right. Well, so there are. What are some of the features of Burton things that you think distinguish Burton from its competitors? In other words, this step-in binding thing, that's amazing.
Well, it's kind of funny because if you say step-in around the company, we make you do push-ups.
Really?
Wow. Yes, because, it's like we don't want to be called step-in, it's step-on.
Step-on.
That's right, and Jake named that himself.
Well,
actually,
I'll do push-ups later.
Okay, good, very good. And actually, it's kind of funny when we were first working on this project, and I've worked on every step-in project Burton has ever made. Our working name for the project was Ozzy, because we were listening to Ozzy in the tunes in the White Room, and we figured that we were just riding the crazy train because we had never been really successful at this before, what made us think that we were going to be successful now. But it's our willingness to continue to take risks, and it comes basically from the top management of Jake and Donna, is we need to take risks to continue to make the company moving forward. Jake doesn't really like nostalgia, makes him feel old, so we really only look that way, and he only wants people around him that look that way. So a big focus of our company right now is accessibility to the sport. We want to make the sport more accessible for people. We want to make it easier to do. We don't want people struggling to get into their bindings, sitting on the snow and freezing. We want people to be having fun. So anything that we can do to make that is what we're looking for. But we also want people to feel good about themselves. So we want to look
that's
good.
what we would call a pain point. A pain point for the growth of your market is that the people primarily. I'm going to spitball this, but I mean, primarily, currently the people who do it it's all fairly young people, I think, and they're really into it. If you're going to get to the much larger market of people who generally do recreation in the winter, which is probably a much bigger number, a pain point is just getting the equipment on.
Yeah, and making it easier to ride. And when you have a family, let's say if you have a budget of so much money and you're going to take your family on vacation, do you want to take them snowboarding where maybe your wife's not going to be speaking to you by day 2, or do you go to the beach? And really we want people to feel more comfortable about going to snowboarding. So how do we make that more accessible, less intimidating, easier to kind of put your hand on? And also, big thing, how do you get people to come back day 2? How do they not just like leave after day 1 and say, oh my God, I feel like I was just in a car wreck, I'm never coming back
again? This is we haven't gotten to this topic yet in our discussions in the class, but we will. Something called an experience map. It's used a lot in design thinking, where you subdivide a given experience into a whole series of so-called touch points so that going skiing or going snowboarding would, that experience would start in Boston with the decision to do it, and you'd have to, like, okay, what was it? Did you hear about it on the radio? Did you, what made you think that this was now a good idea?
Go to the big show because you had nothing else to do?
Yeah. So, but all those points, and so you array a list of them, all the way through exhaustion afterwards, nightcap, where you stay, and all that sort of stuff. And you try to identify which ones are really excellent and which ones are awful. And that's kind of how you design an experience. You map the whole thing out. I would imagine you guys do something similar when you think about this stuff.
We do. It's not maybe quite so, I don't want to use maybe regimented as that, but going back to the empathy part, my way of having empathy in my early days and even right up till now is I worked contests. I tuned for the pro riders. I would go to photo shoots, but I spent my time freezing my butt off out on snow with these guys. And like you said earlier, they can't tell you maybe what they need, but by observing them, I can see where maybe they're doing well and where maybe I could do something to make that better. And if we do something that actually makes it better, okay, how can we incorporate that? And then moving forward, now we're doing a lot more work where literally we're just going and hanging out and going through the rental procedure, taking lessons.
Sure.
Like I'll go and I'll take a lesson and I ride goofy, but I'll go to the lesson, I'll set myself up regular and just go through a lesson as if I'm a newbie. And try to go through that experience.
That is exactly what Tim Brown of IDEO would tell you to do.
Right.
The book that we're using for this course.
Sure, I'm familiar with Tim.
Yeah, okay. So I'm not shocked. And by the way, their mode of thinking and the way they talk about it is taking over American business, I think.
Yes.
I mean, I think that for dealing with change, for dealing with circumstances that are never static, and they're not in your business, but they're not in a lot of businesses, and people who think they're always solving the same problem are probably not going to be solving it for much longer.
Right.
And so one of the things, so they talk about empathy a lot, talk about problem definition. We talked earlier in this course about the evolution of the problem that a music player was solving from Victrolas through Spotify. And they were different problems, very different problems, actually. Music was involved. That was the only
getting music.
Yeah. Having access to it but the actual problem to be solved was wildly different. Sometimes it was furniture. Sometimes it was, in the early days, the Victrolas came with a complete set of music. I don't know if everybody knows that, but it had these cabinets, and a complete set of the music of the day was there, kind of like an iPod.
Yeah, a bigger one.
Yeah. Not 1,000 songs in your pocket, but maybe 500 songs in your bureau.
Right.
But knowing which problem it is you're solving is, in a way, it's the core part of this whole process that I find interesting, and the thing that in many ways, being trained as a designer myself, comes most naturally to me. That is, just because you tell me, George, this is a house I want you to design for us. We got a picture from a magazine, and we think this is what it is. We might have a little conversation about, well, how are you living? I might observe exactly as you say, not because. If you ask people to fill out a survey, especially in your business, I'll bet you the results are so different from what observation would yield that you'll have just two totally different set of facts.
And they can send you down a dead end. Really, yeah. Observation to me is the most important part because people can tell you one thing, but it's hard to formulate into words or whatever what you're actually feeling. And having the skill to be able to observe and do something with that is it's kind of crucial, and it's not anything that anybody's born with, and it takes a lot of practice and repetition to do it.
Right, that's super interesting. Well, it's clear that you guys go through a big iteration process, and I was watching it on the small screen in the back. But, I do wonder, is this a kind of product that people own more than one of? Or are they, because it seems like they're such different brand identities maybe, and they might own multiple Burton snowboards, but they might be, is there a super fast one and then there one for jumping? And
Sure, we call it having a good quiver.
A good quiver. Okay.
Yeah, you got to have a good quiver.
I got to be kitted out and have a good quiver.
You got to be kitted out and you got to have a good quiver, which in a way means in our market, there are a lot of people where, they'll buy the board and the boots and the bindings and they'll get their coat and whatever, and then, they're still going to be running that 18 years later.
Right.
It's kind of like my idea of a bowling ball. If you have it, you have it, okay? But then the real enthusiast who wants to be on the front end of it is going to be upgrading on a yearly or every other year. And then there are those that, because comparatively speaking to skiing, snowboarding is relatively inexpensive. You can get a really nice top-of-the-line board for $500.
I see.
And you can get really great boards for $300 to $400. And a lot of times, the graphic on the top of the board is a work of art.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people, like for instance, we do collaborations with Pink Floyd. We did a whole Pink Floyd board series, and we're the Grateful Dead board series, and we launched this year a Led Zeppelin board series, and one of our riders is sponsored by Martin Guitar. And so we build boards like that. And
so your audience isn't that young.
Not all of them, no. Well, like I was telling Peter this morning, how many people am I seeing walking around with Beatles and Led Zeppelin T-shirts on that weren't even alive when John Lennon was alive? Blows my mind, really.
That's true, actually.
But yes, the real enthusiast wants to have these, and sometimes people just buy them just to have the art. Absolutely.
I thought that might be true, and it just creates a sort of another slice of problem solving for you guys. In other words, one of them is really scientific, one of them is aesthetic. I wondered, how do people store their boards? Do they display them in their home, or?
Some do, yes.
Yeah.
So I have a few boards actually that I have kind of laid out. I'm not a huge board collector because most of the boards that I've got over the years have been test boards, black tops, and they're usually destroyed by the time I get done with them. But I've gone to some people's houses that are extreme enthusiasts, and they actually have board racks made where you can spin the board so you can see the top and the bottom. And for years, one of our products was a little clip system that you could mount into your house and put your boards up on the wall.
That strikes me as paying a lot of attention to what your customers really want.
Yes.
And it wouldn't be obvious, right? I mean, that's not how you own most other products.
Yeah, most other things are just kind of you use them up, and when you're done with them,
store them in
you're
the
done with
garage
them.
or whatever it is.
Now, on the other hand, there's an awful lot of snowboards that last day of the season with all the mud and everything on them, and they just go in the corner of the garage, and then you hope that it's still there in the fall, and that happens as well.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you a bunch of things about testing and how what you test for. But you showed us an incredibly rich detail, that testing process and the technology that brings it there. When you started, now you said you guys have been using digital tools from the very beginning.
Since about 93 or 94.
So quite early days.
I was still at Grindrite at that time, but yes, and other companies in snowboarding, like Morrow Snowboards, would as well, with using the SLA process of making it out of a resin bath. Yes.
Right. So now, do most companies that make snowboards say, folks, could you all in the back please listen and keep to yourselves so we're not having a revolution in here? I know this is a rebellious company, but I still think modest decorum.
We throw things.
Yes, well, we don't. Anyway, do most companies that make snowboards also make all the associated gear? No, some just make boards, I bet.
Most of our competitors now just make boards.
And their company doesn't resemble yours in the level of high-tech complexity. Because just making a board, it would seem to me, would be a much more straightforward enterprise than all this complicated
and most of that
business.
is, like I showed earlier, you can make snowboards. If you have a milling machine that you can make the cassettes and that kind of stuff, and a big industrial sander to profile and things like that, it's the investment in tooling for that is relatively straightforward. It's almost like having a machine shop.
Right.
But actually, the heavy-duty 3D tools for binding development and things like that are the things that we really invested in. And I will say that there is nobody else in snowboarding that does what I do.
Really?
Yeah, I think I have the only job of my kind in the whole industry.
Well, that's cool.
And so people ask me how they can get my job, and I'm like, they're gonna have to wait until I'm done with it. Don't anybody go like clipping my brake lines or anything, right?
Now, how about the difference between like what I would call maybe like an artisanal board and a mass-produced board? Like, it seems to me, I would be surprised. Like, for example, in surfboards, I think there used to be, I don't know if there still are, but there used to be sort of very small producers who produced very unique kind of surfboard. I know in Hawaii there are people like this.
Shapers, yeah.
And then there's mass production houses that make them in a factory.
It's actually kind of cool because in snowboarding right now, that is happening a lot, where you're getting a lot of small scale companies like Powder Jets in Vermont and Franco Snow Shapes out in Jackson Hole, who are they make maybe 400 or 500 boards a year of different shapes, and they're all sort of handmade, hand shaped. Using different either types of wood or graphical looks and things like that, and that has been gaining a lot of popularity in the industry.
I'm not at all surprised. It happens in everything. There's a constant battle between sort of authenticity and one-of-a-kindness on the one hand, and scalable, repeatable, therefore mass-producible on the other hand. I'm not surprised at all. So we know the story of how you got in this. We know about the intense process of iteration, of different ways to empathize with your customers, and the incredible complexity of the production of all this. I have to tell you, this is so much more complicated than I ever thought it would be. I thought snowboards, okay, well that's going to be, I don't know, like lampshades, or actually we'll probably have a lampshade person one day and it'll turn out to be
Crazy,
hideously complex. But this is really fascinating to me. Do any of you in the audience, how many of you in the audience have snowboarded before? Well, it's not bad. Yeah, does ski count? Probably not to him. To
actually,
me, yes.
Sure, it does, because the way I look at it is you're sliding on snow. Gravity works, and there are still 2 resorts in America that don't allow snowboarding, and I kind of feel like in a world where there's just so many ways to be divisive, like being divisive on the mountain is just nuts. But anyway, so yeah, we'll take the 2 plankers and the 1 plankers just as long as you're out sliding on snow. And the cool thing is that all the skiers now are buying Burton outerwear, so we'll take that all day, every day. And helmets and goggles. So
now I do have a question about the playing field in a way, the mountains themselves, because I do go enough to be aware that over the years there's developed a completely alternate universe of terrain for snowboarders.
Absolutely.
And when I first started, of course, everybody skied on the same place, but it turns out the terrain that was good for skiing wasn't necessarily as interesting for snowboarding, and now they have rails and they have
parks,
all kinds of
parks.
Yeah.
Parks are everything, skiers and snowboarders. I mean, you go into a park and you'll see it. It's probably 50-50 skier to snowboarder in the parks. Okay, so the way that the park has developed as a feature of a resort, and how much the resorts invest in creating these playgrounds, if you will, for being able to do tricks, and it kind of gets like a lot of these people together, and everybody gets to observe each other. It's like, oh my gosh, that was a beautiful back 5, or oh, you really stacked that one, or but it's because of the kind of the demographic of our market and everything. Everybody rides together, okay, and you have your crew, and you go on out and you ride your crew. Yeah.
Right. How much has the GoPro camera changed snowboarding?
The fact that everything is recorded with the GoPro is, I don't know, it's a little mind-boggling to me, because I find it to be just this technical distraction, and people be like, hey, it's not on. And I'll be like, yeah, So, but I think that what it's done is it's made it so that everybody can broadcast what they do and where they are globally, and it creates more people that are potentially aspirational towards it. It's like, I want to do that. And
I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think that this idea of growing the market of, like, if somebody said to me, how do we grow the snowboard market? It would seem it's got to get, it has to have an identity that is larger than the one it has right now, because the one that it has right now it seems to me, just as a day tripping observer, to be very defined. It's not sort of random as to who. If you showed me 100 people, I think I could probably, and you said 20 of them were snowboarders, I think I could probably pick out the 20 pretty closely. Probably not perfect, but pretty close.
Yeah, you never know.
Maybe not. But it does seem that it certainly, as the demographic ages, you have to make sure that young people still really want to do it. That's the core of, like.
And that is actually a funny point that you bring up, that right about now, that there's a lot of people that are like, oh, well, my dad's snowboards.
Yeah, right, it's no
okay,
longer.
you know, they've been doing that, and so they've a lot of younger winter sports enthusiasts have taken up skiing because the ski industry has changed to chase us a lot. We really helped them to learn how to make their skis differently, and then the advent of skiing in parks. And the fact of the matter is, skiers go bigger than snowboarders. I mean, and I'm here to admit that. You look at a half pipe contest or something like that, the skiers are going huge. And so, you know, when I was young, in the early days of snowboarding, you know, the only skiers that you could look to emulate were the gate bangers. Okay, but now, you know, the skiers are in the park. They're doing amazing things in backcountry and everything. So skiing is suddenly a lot more appealing than it was. It's not so dorky and weak as it once was.
Well, you can emulate your grandfather. You can't emulate your father.
That's right. And to me, that's kind of a cyclical thing, and it's happened in a lot of different industries. And what we're working on really, again, to make it more accessible is just make it fun.
Yeah.
Really, really make it fun and make it something that you want people to do. There's always, I mean, in the beginning in snowboarding, everybody hated us. Okay, and so, you know, if we have to go through that again for a little while, that'll pass, and then we'll come back.
It could be good for the brand. You
It
never
could
know.
be really great for the brand, yes, absolutely. And we have some fun with that, really.
Do we have any questions from the students? Yeah.
What's the general timeline from when you come up with like a new concept, like your step-ons, and when you actually release it?
Step-on was an anomaly, okay? Step-on was one of the longest projects I've ever worked on. We wanted to launch it a year ago, okay? And we worked so hard to get there, but we just ran into a few snags along the way, and you know, all the different stakeholders that were involved finally came up with it and said, you know, we need a little bit more time on this. And we used to be very like, damn the torpedoes, we're gonna launch. And if we're gonna launch in 1.7, we're gonna launch in 1.7. And this was the one time where we finally just said, no, we're gonna give it another year because we need more testing time. We need more to learn about it because everything was so new. So we launched it now for an 18 product. And I'd be in those meetings and I'd be like, you know, 1.7 and we're in heaven, 1.8 and we're too late, okay? And then after a while they were just like, okay, Doyle, shut up and go back to your room. So that was an anomaly. Most things like the double take buckle and the hammock strap, that was about an 18-month development timeline from initial concepting through engineering, prototyping, production, delivery. Okay, so it's about 18 months we like. 3 years is pretty long in our business. When people ask me, like, what's your 5-year plan? Well, our crystal ball doesn't really work out that far because everything can change so much then.
But are you the only guys who have the step-on binding?
At this time, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
You had a question.
How do you decipher between user groups like rental users and per buyers, and like how the technology, I guess, entices them separately?
Does everybody get that? The question is about how do you understand users who are rental users differently than buyers? Because I agree. I think it sounds like
Okay, and like how do we actually develop products specifically for rental to satisfy that market and the buyers in that market? We have a program. We have a resort program within the company, and it's our resort team. We used to call it Learn to Ride, okay, LTR, and now we call it Experience Snowboarding. But it's our entire team, it's about 4 or 5 people, and they work with all the resorts around the country. And we actually teach them how to, we've taught them how to teach snowboarding. We've taught them a lot about how rental product can get made, and with them, we bring them in as partners in that product development. So just 2 months ago, we brought in key buyers from Hunter Mountain, from Mountain Creek in New Jersey, from some of the like Brandywine out in the Midwest and some of the other places out west. And we brought them in and we gave them what we called a roundtable of some early concepts of what the step-on rental product might look like. And we got their feedback from that. And we're incorporating that feedback into the continued development of that product, which was on that one slide of the SLS product that we've been breaking out recently. So like everything, we try to empathize with them and figure out where their points are. And honestly, this winter, I plan on spending an awful lot more time than ever before, not so much with team riders, but hanging out in rental shops. I'll spend weekends at Hunter Mountain or down in Mountain Creek and get into just the absolute zoo that is a rental shop on a Saturday morning.
Yeah.
Okay, and have you ever worked in one? All right, so that's where that's coming from. Yeah, you know, you've got like 10 seconds with each customer, and it's a Army food line, and you just got to get them out the door. Right. Yep. So one of the things that I'm really working on personally is passive education for the customer. You get somebody in the beginning of that line that's from Brooklyn and they've never, ever snowboarded, but there they are, they came up on a bus tour. How do we sort of give them an idea a little bit while they're waiting in line of what they can expect once they get up there?
Another perfect spot for experience design, because as you empathize with that customer, in the line, oh my God, I'm losing valuable time on the mountain or whatever.
Right. And then you get the stuff that you don't know how to use.
Yeah. That's a perfect example of an experience that is totally ripe for redesign.
Absolutely.
Because it really is pretty bad in most of its respects. If you end up with skis that fit and boots that aren't killing you and poles that you can reach, you think it's a heroic day.
Right.
But there's so many things that can go wrong.
Right.
And if you're with a family, it's a mess.
Where'd you work?
I actually, in New Jersey, high country sports.
Okay.
Not near a mountain, which makes it even harder.
City shop. Yeah, exactly.
Here,
Exactly.
we have another question in the back. Yeah. Okay, which markets or countries would Burton like to enter that they're not currently in?
Well, we're everywhere in the world that really we are. It's pretty crazy, but one of our biggest growing markets right now is China. In China, there is a growing middle class, upper middle class, and there are an awful lot of mountains that aren't far from Beijing and the northern part of the country. And so we have an office in Beijing that's a sales office, and we've been partnering with new resorts in China with our experienced snowboard program and getting people out, trying to figure out how to get people from the city to the mountain. And we have partners in China that have been helping us with that, organizing train trips. We've been organizing events. Shaun White held, for the last couple of years in a row, his Air and Style contest in Beijing. And so China is, to us, a tremendous growth opportunity. We'd like to be more involved in Russia, but it's just so hard to do business there. It's really hard to get paid. I mean, they'll take your stuff and you might never not see any money. Yeah. But the Chinese market is an incredible growth opportunity for us. So that is probably our biggest one in the world right now, is because the country is ripe for it. There's people that want it. Our brand is very strong there. And recreation is becoming a much more important part of the Chinese middle class life.
Any other questions? Oh, okay,
Okay,
very
cool.
good.
Thanks.
Okay, well, please join me in thanking Doyle.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. And thank you. Thank you very much, George.
My
I really
pleasure.
enjoyed
Really,
it.
this was fun.